Hi, everybody, and thanks for attending today's webinar, Deliver DevSecOps on Microsoft Azure, using Chef InSpec for cloud security best practices. My name is Erin, and I'm on the marketing team here at Chef, and I'm happy to introduce today's speakers on this webinar as Nick Rycar, Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager here at Chef, and we also have Alan Baptista, our Product Marketing Director. Before I turn it over, I have a couple housekeeping items to cover. If you have any questions, you can submit them through the Q&A section at any time, and we will probably be answering questions at the end of the presentation if it's not super pertinent to the demo or anything along those lines. For the best viewing experience, we recommend closing any additional programs or browser sessions running in the background, as webinars are bandwidth intensive. And finally, this webinar is being recorded, and an on-demand version of the presentation will be available by tomorrow, and we will be sending out an email as well. So for those of you just joining, welcome to today's presentation, Deliver DevSecOps on Microsoft Azure, using Chef InSpec for cloud security best practices. Let's go ahead and get started. Nick, over to you.
Thanks, Erin. As Erin mentioned, I'm Nick Rycar, a Senior Technical Product Marketing Manager at Chef, and we'll be taking a look at how we deliver on security and compliance, specifically in Microsoft Azure and more broadly in your cloud estate in general with Chef. There will be a demonstration as part of this, but first we're going to go ahead and take a look at some of the challenges specific to running our workloads in the cloud. With some special focus paid to why specifically it is that organizations find cloud security challenging. From there, we'll take a look at how Chef helps folks manage cloud security, complete with a live demonstration, and we'll have some time to answer all of your questions at the end. So with that, let's kick things off by taking a look at what actually are the challenges that organizations report they're having in their cloud environments. Where are folks struggling? And I've actually done a few webinars now talking about cloud security. And last year I went and I pulled up some data from RightScale, the RightScale 2019 State of the Cloud report that Flexera produces. And at that point, the security was the number 4 challenge reported in this top 8 list. And in 2020, the same report, security has now risen to number 1 with a bullet. So indeed, it remains a challenge for folks that are running their workloads in the cloud. And it is one of the only ones that has increased year over year. So if we take a look at sort of comparing the enterprise respondents to the survey, just security and license management have become more challenging in the past year. And it's worth noting as well that the 2020 report also had some data as far as what the impact of COVID-19 is. And a vast majority of the respondents asked, and there is a note that there is a smaller sample here since it was only asked of later respondents, but of those polled, vast majority of them planned to expand their cloud usage during the pandemic. So whatever challenges there were yesterday, they're only going to be exacerbated by increased scale in 2020. And it's not super surprising that cloud security is challenging, but it might seem so at the outset. Particularly because a whole part of the pitch of why you would want to migrate things to the cloud is to improve your security stance. For one, there's a whole lot less that needs to be directly managed. So this actually comes from a Azure doc page talking about cloud security. And one of the big gets of shifting workloads into the cloud is that a lot of the infrastructure, particularly the commodity resources, the servers themselves, physical security, and in a lot of cases, even things like middleware software, end up becoming managed by our cloud provider, so that we can vastly narrow the scope of what we need to cover in our own security, which in theory should make our lives easier. But there are some problems that are not even unique to the cloud. So when we talk about why security is a problem or a challenge for folks in the cloud, it's important to note that it's a challenge for folks not in the cloud too. And so there's definitely some overlap where there are some universal challenges, as well as some challenges that are unique to cloud environments. And a challenge that is universal is that there are a number of organizations within, or a number of business units within an organization that have a stake in security and compliance, but they're not all speaking the same language. And indeed, they have different specific tasks. Compliance officer wants to know how we are positioned against our regulatory requirements. Security officer has similar concerns, but are more sort of practical and functional as far as, how best practices are being implemented. Whereas developers and operators are responsible for implementing things in a way that doesn't fly afoul of either of those first two groups of constituents. The problem is that they're all using different tools to evaluate and configure environments. And so where they overlap, there is time-consuming translation that needs to be done. How are security officers able to audit that configurations are secure? How are compliance officers able to assess whether a particular change has impacted a compliance position? It's very difficult with needing to translate between those different worlds. There's also a fairly common problem of the traditional approach to security saving auditing until far too late in the software development lifecycle. And so when a security review is happening, in many cases, only when code is about to be promoted to production, anything that we find that is out of compliance at this state ends up being slow and costly to fix, since we have to make our way all the way back to the drawing board and push out a new update. So the earlier that we can evaluate our security and compliance position, the better able we are to adapt to any changes and catch any regressions early so that they don't become impactful to us. Because this is a fairly universal problem, where it is specific in a cloud world is that we have this same problem, but often at greater scale. Cloud environments have given us the ability to spin up and down environments very quickly and easily, and to horizontally scale environments and break our application stacks into microservices, so that this same problem exists, but times n. However many more resources are being managed, you have that many more things that need to be evaluated. And then there's the part that is specific to the cloud, because the promise of better cloud security through a more limited set of things to be assessed, as well as cloud tools designed to help you assess them, goes hand in hand with an understanding of shared responsibility. And this is something that is crucial to understand in order to get cloud security correct. So this actually is from that same page in Azure's documentation. And what we're looking at here is kind of, in a sense, comparing how all in on the cloud you are. So if you're running things on-prem, well, you as the customer are responsible for everything, including the physical host, network, and data center, because, hey, it's your data center. If you're doing infrastructure as a service, so you're just running VMs in the cloud to replicate what you're doing on-prem, you've essentially cut out that responsibility for the physical hosts and everything, but you're still managing servers the same as you were before. So you need to make sure that the servers are hardened and patched, et cetera, et cetera. And as we start going to more and more cloud-managed components, there's less and less for us to manage. But, and this is key, there is more and more that we need to learn, because every service, be it network control, operating system, et cetera, that we hand over to our cloud provider, we are always responsible for our data, our accounts, and et cetera. And if we're moving to a different system of managing those things, we need to understand how to properly secure those systems. especially since in some cases, even within a single element, there is a shared responsibility. If I'm building a fully virtualized, data center in PaaS resources in the cloud, but I'm still using a virtual network within that cloud, well, I still need to secure that network the same I would need to secure my physical network. But now there might be different tools that I use to do it. So whenever I look at these challenges and reports like the one Flexera produces, the thing that always comes out to me is, where does this lack of resources and expertise fall? Because insofar as a security challenge is unique to the cloud, this is usually where it lies. It's not even that I don't have fewer things to manage. It's that I didn't know what things I had to manage because I'm in a new world now. If I'm running on multi-cloud, well, that just gets exacerbated. So how do we make things better? Well, this has been a big focus for Chef in the past few years. And in particular, in tackling those challenges highlighted. First and foremost is making sure that we have all of our stakeholders sort of coming from a consistent place. We still all have our individual most important thing, but we need to make sure that we understand where our work impacts our partner BU's works. So when it comes to Chef, we have the language Chef InSpec that is designed with that concern in mind. InSpec takes any particular thing that we want to evaluate and audit and breaks it down into information that is pertinent to everyone. What am I checking here? Here we're making sure that the SSH service is set to use the version 2 in its protocol. If I'm a compliance officer, I might be concerned with what's the regulatory impact of that. Well, I can define a weight within InSpec as well as metadata like tags so that I can say that this is a concern associated with PCI Rule 7.1. If I'm in information security, I want to understand what the implications are of this failing. And so I can see more tagging here as related to OpenSSH server and a link to the security guide going into more detail of why I don't want to be using Protocol 1. And of course, if I'm in development or operations and I'm actually building environments that might be running SSH, I want to know how the hell this is being checked so that if it fails, I can fix it. In this case, InSpec provides resources for evaluating a number of different things. In this case, it actually understands how to read an SSH config. And can make a simple assertion. Its protocol should be 2. But of course, this is if you wanted to go ahead and write this code yourself. A part of it is that we've written a lot of this code for you. And this helps attack not only making sure we have information that's useful to everyone, but we have the ability to attack the knowledge gap directly. If I'm a brand new Azure user, I need to know what I don't know. And having something like a predefined set of rules, in this case, the Azure Foundation's benchmarks that are published by the Center for Internet Security, for which Chef has created an InSpec profile that is certified by CIS and available to our customers, so that we can go ahead and apply this profile to our cloud environment and get a good top level baseline of where we sit in our compliance stature, regardless of how adept or knowledgeable we are about the specifics of managing Azure environments. We then have the ability to kind of take that data and aggregate it in Chef Automate, which is our platform for maintaining observability. Here we can see reports that will detail the success and failure of our audits, as well as historical data over time, as well as a filterable view, so that as we make sure that we are capturing our full environment and indeed moving our security and compliance assessments towards earlier environments like development, staging, and QA, we're able to assess and evaluate those things all in one place. And all of the information that's provided in those in those InSpec controls is available to us here, so that whoever we are within an organization, we can find the information that is most germane to our world. And with that, I'm going to take a quick peek at the Q&A widget here. And the question that has come in so far, we'll dig a little bit into here, which is, where can I find the CIS benchmarks? The benchmarks themselves are publicly available. So they are published on cissecurity.org. And you can actually see, if I've been here once or twice before, all of the profiles that Chef has been certified by them on. As for those benchmarks and how you get them with Chef, one way to do it is via Chef Automate. So right now this is a fairly fresh Chef Automate server. I launched it yesterday and it's not managing anything right now. I haven't created any nodes or applications for it. So it's relatively fresh. That said, I have done a couple of things ahead of time. One is I have created a couple of node integrations for Azure. One to evaluate things over the Azure API, and one for evaluating VMs that have been deployed within Azure. The way that these were created, if I go into create a new integration here, I can see the cloud integrations available for AWS, Google Cloud, and Azure. I can select whether I'm interested in VMs or just API calls. If I am running Chef Automate in Azure and the VM I'm running Chef Automate on has IAM privileges to view things within my subscription, I can go ahead and click that button and I'll be done. Otherwise, as long as I have a service principal, I believe that has the collaborator permission on a subscription, I can go ahead and add its client ID secret and the tenant ID of the subscription here. And that's it. If I'm doing VMs, I can also create credential associations where if a particular tag exists on a VM, I can define a password or SSH key that should be used. As for this, again, so I don't have to go and type in all my secrets here in a live webinar, I've created these in advance. For an Azure account I have for the lovely fake company Northwind Baking that I've been using in a few different demos now. And when it comes to evaluating how secure my Northwind Baking Azure environment is, we'll need to hop over to the Compliance tab. Before I can do anything, I need a profile. This will go ahead and define what it is I want to check. And assuming that I'm a completely new user here and I haven't created anything custom, I can go ahead and take a look at the library of available profiles. So as far as the question as to how do we get the CIS content that Chef has published, this is the place. I can go ahead and search in here. So I'm interested specifically in the Azure foundations. I'll go ahead and if I want to take a look at the level 1 or level 2 benchmarks and what they entail, I can go ahead and do that here, or just install the profile on my Automate server so that now when we hop back into the profiles view, I have one profile available and it's ready to use. In order to create a compliance report, I'll need to then create a scan job. So here I can go ahead and take a look at what nodes I want to scan. If I'm already managing nodes in Chef Automate, I can go ahead and select them here. We can also see an option has shown up for each of the Azure integrations that I've created. For the VM one, it's actually taking a look at my Azure environment and dynamically populating a list of all of the nodes that it's found. If I wanted to only look at nodes for a particular region or nodes that have a particular tag, I can go ahead and add that information here, and this list will update accordingly. For this, however, I'm going to go ahead and use the API integration. This is going to be used to evaluate not the VMs, but the cloud environment itself, which is what we'll be looking at with these Azure Foundation benchmarks. I can give it a name, and I can go ahead and say Azure CIS. We're not testing it this time. Let's go ahead and just call it, I don't know, Azure CIS scan demo. Demo, that's a good word. And if I want it to be recurring, I can go ahead and set the schedule for that. So go ahead and run at, 1723, repeat every day. Perfect, save. And that's gonna go ahead and run every time the schedule comes up. Of course, so we don't have to wait for that. Like any good TV chef, I've got a finished product already sitting in the oven waiting for us. So we can see what the data looks like on the other side of this audit. Spoiler alert, my environment did not pass. It is not CIS compliant, but this wouldn't be much fun at all if it was. Here, my node is just my cloud environment. So there's only one thing I'm taking a look at, but I can go ahead and see specifically how it fared in the profile itself. There were 43 failed controls, 34 pass controls, and 34 skipped controls for some reason or another. If I want to go ahead and look at the details for that, I can go ahead and do that as well. Here, I can go ahead and see it's my Northwind Baking Azure account that I'm interested in, and it'll start with a full list of everything that was run. What I see at the top level here is that data we saw as sort of germane to everyone. I just want to understand what failed. All right, the no guest users check failed, standard pricing tier selected failed, et cetera, et cetera. Same for pass controls, skip controls, et cetera. If I want to look into any details, I can go ahead and hit the plus here. I can get a little bit more of a rationale, where in this case, the CIS benchmark is talking about Azure Security Center specifically, and is calling out that with the standard pricing tier, there's further defense in depth with threat and anomaly detection, as well as behavior analysis being provided. So the recommendation is that this is set. If I had no idea this was even a thing, I just got an alert that told me I'm currently on the free tier, and if I get to the standard tier, here's what I get. If I then become someone interested in implementing things, I can go ahead and even go all the way down to the source code here. See sort of where things are specifically called out in the CIS benchmarks. See, in this case, I'm running the level 2 benchmarks, which are a little bit more stringent. I can also see the InSpec resource. And again, we have cloud-specific resources here. So all I'm doing is I'm taking a look at the Azure Security Center policy, taking a look at the default policy, and seeing what its pricing tier is. Again, each thing that we're evaluating is just setting our expectation and giving a pass or fail response as to whether that expectation is met. We'll see a lot of things in here as well that call out the configuration of different components within the cloud. So for example, near the bottom here, I can see that I have unattached disks in my kind of compute environment here that are not encrypted. Again, same thing. I can see the high level of what's being evaluated, the details of what we're looking for. You can actually see the server by server breakdown of which things failed. So there's actually 2 disks that failed this check. And indeed, I can see the source code. And this is another powerful thing about representing compliance as code. Not only am I able to run and evaluate this on demand, but I'm also able to account for more dynamic behavior. This is iterating over every VM disk in my cloud account and selecting only those that are unattached and running this evaluation on each of those. So as my environment gets larger and smaller, this check and this scan never need to change. They're always going to report back on whatever's found at the time of the scan. So to kind of look at this a bit more specifically, we looked at a few examples here. For example, the Azure Foundation Benchmark 2.1 about Security Center. And again, this comes down to, in a lot of cases, the configuration issue isn't that the ability to secure our environment wasn't there. It's just we didn't know about it. And indeed, logging into any cloud dashboard, there's usually a few dozen services to figure out as far as, is this my networking? Is this my storage? Is this my access control? How do those individual things get set? Here is a great starting off point to figure out where those holes are. From there, we can go ahead and take a look at things that might be more familiar, right? Making sure disks are encrypted is an issue that I might have on premises or in the cloud, but here I have the ability to go ahead and use the information my cloud provider makes available to me to determine those things programmatically. And again, because I'm using code here, I can run those audits dynamically. So when I'm looking for, say, insecure buckets of data, or reused passwords, or unencrypted disks, or anything that can be a dynamically scaled entity, I have a way to go ahead and represent and audit those things collectively so that nothing ever falls through the gaps. Oh yeah, helps if we zoom in so the important part is legible. But again, yeah, each scan will first query Azure for any unattached disks. And so as environments change, we never lose sight of them. And again, this isn't limited to just the cloud environment itself, but anything we run within that cloud. So we have CIS benchmarks for Windows, Linux, Mac OS, as well as some specific software like SQL servers. And all of that is available the same way we saw me download the cloud profile. And, we've seen lots of success with our customers. And so this is often most pronounced when it comes time for audit. And when you are continuously able to evaluate your environment from dev all the way through to production, not only are you able to find and address regressions or security flaws earlier, but you're also able to walk into audits in more regulated environments with a lot more confidence. You know exactly the compliance status of each and every asset you manage. And a big part of reducing the cycle time just comes to being able to produce that data on demand when it is requested, to essentially being able to play the pick a server, any server game, and be able to get that sort of, customized data about its status. So the customer in question here ended up reducing their audit cycle times by a whopping 95%, just because they were able to get exactly the information that was needed right away. And of course, since they were finding things out before the audit, there were fewer things that needed to be fixed. So it was mostly just a matter of sharing the data that proved they were audit ready. One thing that is new since the last few security webinars I've done is Chef has released our Chef Compliant product offering that was announced at ChefConf Online this past June. This includes the audit package that has everything you've seen here, including the CIS certified and chef curated content, as well as our brand new remediation offerings that for select CIS benchmarks will provide not only the ability to audit your systems, but to provide control by control remediation automatically. So with that, we can go ahead and I've got some more resources here. I think, yep, here's the link. So there is a product page for Chef Compliance, including a data sheet that goes into more depth as far as what content is provided. Primarily, these are in the form of CIS benchmarks and DISA STIG profiles. We also have a newly relaunched Learn Chef site with some new training modules that I'd encourage everyone interested to go and have a look at. And then sort of as mentioned, we have sort of some more information about compliance, what is included as part of that offering, as well as which profiles we have available for audit as well as remediation. And with that, we can go ahead and open up the floor to questions. Let's see what we've got here.
All right, Nick, I have one question.
Oh, yes. Thanks, Alan.
That I'll kind of start off us with. And if anyone has questions, please post it in the Q&A tab you see. So you mentioned a few products. I mean, you mentioned Chef InSpec, you mentioned Chef Automate, and you actually showed our profiles there. And you mentioned Chef Compliance there at the end of the presentation. How are they the same? How are they different? What's the distinction between the products?
Yeah, so ultimately, sort of compliance is represents kind of a shift to how we are licensing our software, where we're focusing on the outcome rather than the tooling. So Chef InSpec and Chef Automate are both tools that are included as part of that Chef Compliance subscription. The big sort of differentiator there is that we've seen in this demo a way to run InSpec scans. There are a few different ways to do them, and with sort of the software that Chef produces, a lot of time there's kind of an intersection between those software. So ultimately, however it is that you are performing them, you can go ahead and run that compliance content with that Chef Compliance subscription. And same goes for that remediation packaging. I believe, under the hood, there's like some Habitat in there. There's, a lot of our kit So I wanted to really distinguish sort of what's the license and what's the tool. So InSpec is sort of the tool and the language that you're running these audits, and Automate is where you get observability for it. And compliance is the licensing SKU where you get sort of access to those things as well as the content that can be run on them.
Yeah, I think that applies especially for newer customers or new customers that are trying to get the same results. For existing customers, there is an upsell, I guess, for just the remediation content that you get in compliance. But so a good summary way is to put it is that Chef Compliance relies and works on and is based on the core content, the core capabilities and tools that, with Chef InSpec, with Chef Automate, and Chef Infra in some cases as well. So it's leveraging existing Chef technology, just presented in a different way, in a different format.
Yeah, and it looks like that question had just come in as well. So yeah, that is a great point. Like if you already have access to those profiles from a previous subscription, you still have access to them. The remediation is net new. So if you already have a license and are interested in that remediation content, like Alan said, we can go ahead and help you out with that. If you're a net new customer and all you're interested in is audit and remediate, this would probably be the SKU for you.
Yes, and reach out to the sales team if that's something you want to get more details about or want to dive into specifics on the content and how it's used and so on. So we gladly take that on. So there's a couple more questions. There's a few more questions that have come in here, Nick.
Yeah.
InSpec is supported in Azure to run compliance tests against Linux machines as a first-class citizen. Compliance results can be published from Linux machines to the Azure portal. What is the plan for InSpec to support Windows machines in Azure?
Okay, so some of that I can speak to, some of that I cannot. As far as being able to publish InSpec reports directly to the Azure portal, that I am unfamiliar with. So I'm not sure if there's sort of a distinction between sort of the Linux and Windows capabilities there. As far as InSpec itself is concerned, it absolutely can be run on those Windows machines, and we do have CIS benchmarks for Windows Server 2016, 2018, sort of, all of your favorite hits. And those can be run sort of a few different ways. If you're using Chef Infra Client, there is a cookbook that can be used to run them. It can be run directly from Automate, the same way I did via the API call, where it would need to be able to connect over WinRM. And it can be done sort of directly from on the machine itself locally with data collection export to Chef Automate. So there's definitely support for running InSpec scans on Windows and support for having the results of those scans feed into that compliance dashboard I showed you. As far as whether there are limitations for doing so in an Azure native portal, I do not know, but can check into with our partners team.
Cool. And here's another question that I think maybe in many of your minds. In some instances, you have multi-cloud environments, right? It's a hybrid where you have different instances in different platforms. And is there a major difference between the Azure environment and the AWS environment using Chef InSpec tools? And what about other vendors? How does that apply?
Yeah. So generally, the actual controls themselves are going to be specific to each cloud provider. And actually, so for example, in the Azure case, the available resources we have are part of this Azure resource pack. So we can see kind of all of the things that are specific to Azure. But when it comes to actually running these audits, once we've figured out whatever controls we want or what profiles we want to use, the process is exactly the same. InSpec has, and this is, my engineering friends can chastise me. I'm sure I'll get some details wrong here, but there's a component under the hood called train, which handles transports for different types of scans. By default, this has been sort of SSH and WinRM in the past to do infrastructure specific tasks. And there are transports for those 3 cloud APIs as well. So when we're setting up the integration, really the only thing that we need are whatever authentication is required for the cloud of choice. So for AWS, again, same thing. I can read IAM policy from my EC2 environment. Again, the specific stuff you need is a little bit different. You specify default regions and the like for AWS. For Google Cloud, they give you service account credentials as a JSON blob. But outside of that, functionally speaking, they work identically. And in the case where we have the VM integration here, like we do on EC2 and with Azure VMs, we'll have the ability to do that tag association. And I think there was a question about, newly spun up resources. Insofar as we're doing those API-based scans, we're going to go ahead and see just everything at a top level that the service account we've associated with this has access to. When it comes to looking inside of those assets, right now we support doing it with VMs dynamically, so that as long as there is a dynamic tag to credential association that we can create here, we can go ahead and automatically capture new things as they come up. When it comes to like containers and AKS and things like that, I'd have to go ahead and check my team for specific best practices, but typically we can go ahead and combine sort of information that we're pulling out of the API with, like there is a Docker transport as well, where we could go ahead and do whatever container specific evaluation we wanted to do. Also, depending on how that container is created, this is totally sort of off topic for today, but there is another Chef tool, Chef Habitat, that deals with kind of application packaging. And that's actually a way that you can create a container that has a queryable endpoint for a lot of information as well. But I could talk about Habitat all day, and that can be a talk in and of itself. So I'll cut myself off there.
I'm not sure if you answered this question part of that additional question or not, but you mentioned Docker, but we also support Kubernetes, right?
Yeah, so I mean, the big difference there is sort of where specifically in the layer that we're targeting. So Kubernetes would be sort of the scheduling layer, where it ends up being almost analogous to like a VM host for things like Docker containers. And again, in that case, we do have, and I believe if I hop in here, they're even in sort of some of the benchmarks we have available. So yep. And depending on where things are deployed, you can either use some of the cloud-specific profiles if you're using a cloud-provided container platform. But we also, I have to take a look and see where that's published, but we have Kubernetes and Docker compliance profiles available as well. Very
cool, thanks.
Yeah.
Is the remediation applicable to OT environments like cameras?
Generally, I mean, the full answer is it depends, but generally not. We do have a list of sort of supported platforms, and it's generally going to be some flavor of Linux, Windows, or Mac OS. We have launched some ARM support recently, and I've heard tell of things like folks trying to run things on like Raspbians and the like. But generally speaking, there's not a sort of productized release for IoT type devices just yet.
We do have the desktop though, right?
That is correct. So when it comes to sort of desktops and laptops and the like, as long as they are running a supported OS, we do have support for them as well as some tailored content for them. And then sort of when it comes to what things can be scanned, generally speaking, there are some generic resources over the SSH transport, but we have at docs.chef.io the full list of supported platforms.
Very cool. Here's an easy one. Does Chef require a full year subscription, or can it be used as a once or twice scenario?
I believe that it is yearly subscriptions, but that's where I'm going to get sort of out of my lane. But I can definitely get folks in touch with sort of sales reps as far as what options are provided there. I don't know if we go more granular than years. I know we often offer, different incentives for larger term contracts. But again, I'll leave the details to sales folks, and we can absolutely get you guys connected.
Can you create custom in audits content, or can you create custom Azure audits?
Yes, you can. So everything that's in that sort of pre-built profile is built off of these controls, but we can also use sort of the resources provided in this resource pack to create our own. It includes a lot of resource-specific ones, as well as just a generic resource one that if you have one that isn't covered by any of the more specific ones, this has a bunch of options for making generic API calls. So you can absolutely write your own. You can go fully custom. You can go with fully out of the box, as well as combinations. So we do have the ability for you to say, I want to create a custom profile that is everything in the CIS benchmarks minus these 3 controls that I don't care about, or plus these 3 custom controls that are unique to me. So there's a whole lot of opportunity to mix and match there, as well as the ability to set waivers. So those can actually be useful. If you see here, I don't have anything waived in my compliance scan here, but you'll see that there's an area for waived nodes and controls. And this is if I have something that is a failure, I want to report on that failure, but I also expect it and don't particularly mind it. I have a plan to fix this in Q4 or something like that. I can go ahead and set a waiver so that it will end up getting run as part of my scan, but it will not flag a node as failing if it's a known issue. We can also set an automated expiration date. So if I haven't fixed it in Q4, I do want to start getting alerts on that control. So there's a lot of options there for sort of customizability and mixing and matching pre-built and custom content.
Here comes a follow-up question. What about internal private cloud environments like VMware or others?
Yeah, so I'd have to take a look. There's not a built-in integration with the sort of like VMware APIs or anything. But insofar as we are able to work on any infrastructure, we can absolutely evaluate those environments and the VMs deployed within them. When it comes to sort of getting access to those systems, there is the SSH and WinRM access outlined before. There are also, I believe, integrations with the various VMware provisioning utilities in a lot of our command line tools and testing systems and integrations with Terraform. So however it is your launching environments, getting InSpec runs as part of those tends to be pretty easy regardless of where they are.
Yes, I think an important factor here is the versatility of the tool, right? Mm-hmm. You have multi-cloud instances, you have private cloud instances, and you could use templated CIS profiles, but you also have this as STIGs, right? For those that work and deal with the government. So it's just a very powerful tool that allows you that breadth of capabilities.
Yeah. And that's, the nice thing is you have the out-of-the-box content sort of solves what, when I used to work in sales, I called it the blank canvas problem. I have this powerful tool, but the question becomes where to start. And the nice thing about these is that even if I don't know whether or not I care about each and every one of the controls, it gives me something to run where I now at least have to make an active decision. Right. So once I've run this, I can no longer say that I didn't know I could have got better logging if I set this feature on my account. I didn't know I had unsecure, data buckets or anything like that. So that you can at least make the decision. And if the call is that, okay, this is something that isn't a concern for my specific business, we've at least made that call explicitly, and it's not sort of, something that becomes an unknown. And that's as we kind of evolve, right? As we start using these tools more and more, our use cases can always get more complicated. And that's where, every deployment is its own unique snowflake. And that's where the customization really becomes powerful, where I can do simple things. Like I said, pick a control to waive. There is a way to parameterize things. It's called inputs in InSpec, where I can go ahead and set variables and change my expectation per environment, say, all the way down to, all of the fully dynamic behavior that codified compliance allows me to do, like the dynamic volume scan we looked at earlier. So there's definitely a lot of both sort of day one benefits as well as, versatility that lasts you, year 3 or what have you.
Very cool. I'm enjoying this very interactive crew here. There are a couple of questions still, so if you have any other questions, please remember to put it into your Q&A tab. We have plenty of time to answer them. So I think you may have answered this one already, Nick, but just to make sure, when we set profiles, are there any defaults?
Yep. And so if you are creating your own profile, you'll sort of define those, and each sort of InSpec resource. So like each individual resource, we can go ahead in here and see what the default values are for all of their config parameters, and what various matchers can be used with them. So we do have very robust documentation. And if you're using any of the sort of off-the-shelf content, we can also go ahead and see the details of resource by resource, not the scan results. Let me go look at my profiles, which is going to be a very similar view. But in this case, it's not telling me what passed or failed, but letting me look control by control, how is this configured in here? And in certain cases, right, like certain Active Directory elements are not available directly via the API. So in the case, this would be one of those skipped controls. It'll tell you in the output how you can go and check on anything that's not being evaluated here. So yeah, that's the other part, is that even with the pre-baked content, you can go ahead and essentially check its work, see exactly how each element is being evaluated.
Very cool. All right, here's one. Are these tools primarily used by service providers who host applications for a client? Or are they for organizations to check on those hosted applications?
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, the long and the short of it is that it's something that varies. There's definitely folks that it's a no-brainer for, right? If you're in a regulated industry, then you already know about the CIS benchmarks or the DISA STIGs, because they map to sort of the regulatory frameworks that you're beholden to, your PCIs, HIPAAs, GDPRs, et cetera, of the world. That said, security is something that's universal, whether or not that you're beholden to a particular set of regulatory guidelines. So it really comes down to, and I take a very broad view of this, when it comes to compliance, security, or even testing, they're all a very similar process. Each one of these things is understanding and setting an expectation and being able to evaluate whether that expectation is met. And that's something where we even use InSpec as a testing tool. So part of Chef Workstation, which is sort of our command line utility bundle, you have a tool called Test Kitchen that will use InSpec to determine whether or not you configured things properly. I can use it to define whether or not I'm affected by a particular 0 day. Say we've actually had some examples out there for the big baddies, your shell shocks and specters and the likes of the world, or if there's a particularly hot CVE, we can go ahead and create InSpec code to account for it. So there's a very broad set of uses for this, where I'd say that like the folks that are most directly responsible for security and compliance may not actually even be the folks that are implementing these, but are the folks that are going to be benefiting from them. We've actually seen it less as something that's like used by one specific group or another, but more as something that brings those groups together, where you end up having either like an operations team and an InfoSec team that can figure out how to set standards for folks that help them hit deadlines quicker. Or in the case of a service provider, I can go ahead and make sure that, my responsibilities in the shared responsibility model, in this case, I do care about the underlying, infrastructure or application because I own it. I can create the checks for that. and potentially my downstream customers would use it to check the things that they're responsible for. So within the service that's being provided, I have set my own application settings and I want to make sure those are valid. So you would have sort of a case for both ends of that arrangement to be using it, but likely checking the things that are specific to their domain.
And it's also kind of interesting to highlight, it's not only cloud instances, right? You could do your own set of data center resources or desktops, like we mentioned. So it's a very versatile tool.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the key thing, is that a lot of, even folks that are doing heavy auditing, we often find that whatever tooling they're using is either only being used on production instances or only being used by one set of folks. And that expanding it beyond those environments or those users is either just cost prohibitive or performance prohibitive. So a lot of the times, InSpec ends up just becoming the glue that makes those things consistent, making sure I'm evaluating those less sensitive environments so that I'm uncovering issues earlier, or just making sure that I'm getting that information in front of more eyeballs so that I have stakeholders from different teams at least sharing a single worldview.
Yeah, the scalability and because you're dealing with infrastructure as code is really allowing you to be extremely efficient in using these tools. Here's another question, and please, if you have more questions, put them on the Q&A. We have another 10 minutes, under 10 minutes to answer any that you still have. How can we contribute to building InSpec control, the InSpec control repo? Is it open source, and how do we add to it?
It is, and in fact, all of the software that Chef produces is open source, including Chef Automate and Chef InSpec. We can go ahead, and probably the best place to start is there is the community page, where we'll have access to, there is a community Slack, there is a discourse, all of our source code is in GitHub. And a lot of the folks that have contributed to InSpec or contributed new resources or profiles often congregate in, say, like the Slack channels and the like. We do have frequent touch points here. So this is a great place to keep up with, as we start doing more, there's a lot more sort of remote events that we're starting to be involved in now. We can keep track of those.
Yeah, Chef Conf, our user conference, was online this year. So there's tons of content there as well, and it's open. All you need to do is go out and register, and you have access to our complete library of videos that we produced for it. So customers, including the community and sous chefs, have presented there as well. So here's one. Is this primarily a developer's tool versus a director's tool? Who has overall oversight of the program but isn't necessarily an air quotes coder?
Yeah, so I'd say, that's where I think the creators and consumers of the content is divided, where I think that it's probably going to be the folks that are closest to the code and the infrastructure that end up creating new InSpec code. I think you can kind of get a level more abstract as far as the people who are determining what InSpec needs to be used, right? So I could go ahead and decide, for example, which of my CIS benchmarks I want to use, and that wouldn't necessarily require me to create any code. But if I wanted to evaluate something that was in-house or something specific, that would probably be someone who would, add on to that. But then the reports that are generated from that tend to be able to go all the way up. I sort of tend to joke around as I'm going through the dashboards here that, this ends up being my view that I can take all the way up to the C-suite, right? They want to know what's passing, what's failing. Maybe I filter this just to be production ready. I don't want to worry anyone with failures in dev. But essentially, anyone in the organization can look at this and get sort of that high level, what passed, what failed. When we get into the specifics, well, folks that are on more of the InfoSec side of the house will probably be more curious about what standards are we following and which ones of those are failing and where. Whereas the folks that have individual resources that they manage might want to go into, say, like, all right, I need to go into our cloud environment and look at the specific nature of a failure so that I can remediate it. So we wanted to make sure that the information for even that most granular level of how do I go in and fix it is there. But if I'm not the person that needs to do this, well, that's not what's front and center. So there is kind of a very intentional, like, from broadly consumable to specific flow here as we're going through.
Right. So the tool will be probably used more adamantly by the developer, but there is visibility panes and dashboards like you're showing here for the more kind of director overview, right?
Yep. And to say nothing is of sort of exports into whatever other tooling might be used. So for example, we do have the ability to go ahead and say, take an InSpec failure and turn that into a ServiceNow incident or a Slack message or, you know, a webhook to any endpoint. So there's definitely other ways to tie things into other teams' workflows as well. It's just, you know, a matter of, you know, getting the right information in front of the right eyeballs.
Very cool. So we have a few more minutes, I think 5 to be precise. If you have any other questions, here we go. Does Chef have integration with Nutanix? I'm going to just crucify this.
Acropolis.
Yes, thank you.
I'm familiar with Nutanix. I'm not familiar with Nutanix Acropolis, so I'm going to guess there's no direct integration with it. But that said, we do have a lot of sort of genericized exports. For example, that notification one I was just looking at here. So anything that has, you know, a webhook I can send something to is something I could potentially integrate with. And there's a pretty robust and documented APIs within Chef as well. So there is not a pre-built integration that I am aware of, but as far as what it would take to integrate, whether it's something that could just be done easy peasy or whether, you know, you'd have to create a library for it, I don't know offhand, but probably wouldn't be too crazy.
Very cool. So as new questions come in, Nick, are there any kind of parting thoughts, you know, 3 things you want to make sure that people understand about this?
Yeah, I think the biggest one for me is just kind of the idea of, like, you know, there's it's right in the title, right? DevSecOps. Is it different than DevOps? Is there dev, fill in the blanks, ops? And it really comes down to, in my mind, like, it's no different than, you know, DevOps was 12 years ago. It's about sort of understanding that different stakeholders that have been traditionally in sort of siloed and isolated organizations within a company have the same job at the end of the day. And our goal has always been figuring out how to sort of make it easier for those people to work together with technology. And I think really the thing that I kind of take away here is that we wanted to make sure that we took the information that's important to everyone and put it into one place. Does everyone need to know how to create this? No. But I can go ahead and, if, you know, I am the person writing this code with very little understanding about, you know, what it takes to be a compliance officer, understand sort of the part that impacts them and tie it to the part that impacts me. And that's often the part that can be most difficult. So even just being able to kind of understand how your work contextually influences the work of other folks in your company can help you get work done faster. And I'm a long timer at Chef. I've been around actually before Chef InSpec was a thing. And the biggest difference before and after Chef InSpec is that before InSpec, our sort of sales process had the security and compliance teams were usually an inhibitor to automation, because they were the folks that are saying, we're already having security problems today. You're telling me you want to deliver things faster? No, thank you. Whereas now we're able to actually turn those groups into accelerators, where we're able to say, yes, we're going to give you more things to evaluate, but those things are going to get pre-evaluated before you see them. So there's a give and a get, and everybody ends up benefiting. And I think it comes down to sort of the end goal of making sure that we are using automation to make life easier for you. So I think the crossroads of where different teams come together is really what gets me excited about Chef Compliance and InSpec in particular.
Very cool. I think there's a parting question here just to make
Yeah.
sure we get everybody's. And how would you suggest we trigger InSpec tests to run in a DevOps pipeline, for instance, after Terraform builds infrastructure or clouds resources?
Yeah, and this is where I could get myself into trouble making any sort of specific prescriptions as far as that goes. There are a number of ways to do it. I know for me personally, when I'm doing that, a lot of times it makes sense to execute those things locally. So for me, I'm building a lot of demo environments. So I'll actually have that be part of my Terraform so that when Terraform builds something, the last thing it does is go ahead and fire off an inspect run and send that out to my endpoints. The other thing is that you can always create an ad hoc scan the same way that I created those. So it would usually be either a matter of doing like an app ad hoc API or, SSH based scan, depending on what it is that we're doing, or just having an interval that is frequent enough that it's going to, capture my deployment events at a reasonable time frame. There's all kinds of other ways to run things as well. So the real answer is get in touch with, if you're a customer, your customer success folks, and they'll go ahead and get you the answer customized to your specific use case.
Great, thank you for that. And I think, Aaron, you're going to close it off.
Yeah, thanks again, Nick and Alan, for an awesome presentation. As a reminder, this has been recorded and we will send out the follow-up email tomorrow so you can watch again if you so choose. All right, thanks everybody and have a wonderful rest of your day.